How to prosecute Sean Diddy Combs. Who will be called as witnesses? Will he be hit with more charges? How do you prove the charges? How do you structure the case? I'm going to sit down with Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Aronberg to get his take on prosecutors and what they maybe will or should try to do in the case against the rapper and media mogul. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Now here's something we haven't really talked about in depth yet. How do you prosecute Sean Combs? I mean, literally, how do you prove that he committed these sex crimes? Who do you call as witnesses? What evidence do you present? How do you present it? Do you hit him with more charges? And when do you hit him with more charges? Do you indict more defendants? These are natural questions that follows after the 54-year-old was arrested and indicted on federal charges last week in New York. He's currently locked up in the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn after being denied bail twice. Now, the charges he faces are incredibly serious felonies that, if he is convicted, could result in him spending essentially the rest of his life in prison. And before we get into the ways that you prosecute Sean Combs, let me briefly lay out for you the charges. So the racketeering charge is essentially that Combs led a criminal enterprise whose goal, other than to operate a global media and entertainment business, was to engage in the abuse of women, sex trafficking, forced labor, prostitution, the distribution of drugs, to use violence and threats, to commit crimes like kidnapping, arson, bribery, obstruction of justice, all to carry out their goals. All the while to make sure to satisfy the sexual desires of Sean Combs. And one of those desires, by the way, as alleged by prosecutors, were these freak-offs, these elaborate, coerced sexual performances. That's the allegation here. That were sometimes induced by drugs that Combs allegedly forced people to take part in. He's also charged with sex trafficking with respect to victim one. There is an argument that that could be Cassandra Ventura, the very first person to file a lawsuit against him back in November of 2023. And this is sex trafficking by using force, fraud, or coercion to have this person engage in commercial sex acts, meaning for money or something of value was given or promised. There's an element that this has to be enticing, harboring, transporting this person over state or international lines. And then we have the final count, which is transporting people over state or international lines for the purposes of prostitution. Okay, so with that in mind, I want to get into how do you prosecute Sean Diddy Combs. And for that, I want to bring in a special guest. I am joined right now by Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Aronberg in studio. Dave, good to see you.
Jesse, great to be back with you.
Great to have you here. So is prosecuting a high-profile individual like Sean Combs, does that make the case different for you?
If you're a federal prosecutor, you're used to winning. They win about 97% of their cases. Most of their cases settle. It's hard to fight the feds. You know, you don't fight Uncle Sam unless your name is Mark Cuban. You've got those resources. Well, Diddy has Mark Cuban-style resources and connections, and he's going to have the best lawyers money can buy. So the feds are going to be extra careful. Just human nature. When you know you're up against big timers, you're going to make sure all your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed. So
back to that. Does it make it different? More eyeballs will be on it. More eyeballs will be on them.
Absolutely. They know it. Even though they keep everything close to the vest, they don't talk much about stuff. Their hearings are not publicized as far as there are no cameras in the courtroom. You hear about it afterwards. But they're going to make sure that they've got the goods before they go after a big dog like Diddy, Sean Combs. So I think what you've seen already is that they have charged him with things they know they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. If it's just probable cause, they wouldn't move ahead. Probable cause is a standard to get a grand jury indictment. But when it comes to convicting someone, you need something more beyond a reasonable doubt. And they're not going to charge what they cannot prove. So I think that you've only seen one person mentioned in the sex trafficking indictment, victim number one, only one. We think it's Cassie, but I think more will be forthcoming as the evidence starts to come out and as more victims come forward.
I want to take that apart a little bit. There was no rush to indict him, right? They didn't have to. We got to indict him before the end of the year. They could have waited a while, right? They could have waited till they. The reason I ask is, look, he's facing some very serious felonies. It's a very thorough investigation. They've interviewed over 50 witnesses and victims, gone through a number of different pieces of digital evidence, but there were things in that indictment that weren't there, right? There was, I was wondering if there was going to be anything in relation to minors, underage people. Was there going to be anything, specific charges of gun possession, narcotics possession? And he's only hit with these 3 felonies. Only hit. They're very serious felonies. But they didn't have to rush. They could have waited till they had everything. We're going to charge everything we can in one indictment. Why wait? Why not hit? Why do another? It's called a superseding indictment. Why do a superseding indictment? Why not just hit him? One indictment, ready to go.
The longer you wait, there could be a problem, because the longer you wait, there could be more crimes committed. You want to protect the community. And if Diddy is doing this behind closed doors and has this sexual addiction where he has these free coughs, why wouldn't he continue to do it? He's gotten away with it apparently until now. Plus, the longer you wait, people who come forward, like Cassie, they may get cold feet. Evidence could spoil, memories could fade, people could get intimidated. Remember, they alleged that Diddy was obstructing, was trying to intimidate witnesses, threatening them.
Even after the lawsuits came out, even after the homes were raided, that was the allegation.
So if you wait too long, he could tamper with witnesses.
That's right.
He could flee, even though he said, I'm in New York waiting for the prosecution, waiting for the indictment. Yeah, but you got resources. If you really thought it was coming, maybe he gets on his jet and bails.
Well, he gave up his passport to his attorneys, and so did some of his family members. And apparently from the communications that were attached as an exhibit to the defense's letter to the judge when they were requesting bail, they were constant communication with prosecutors saying, this is where he's going this weekend. He's going to be back this weekend. We still have his passport. So I don't know if he was ever going to take off. I personally believe the reason he came to New York, the reason he didn't take off is I think he thought he could make bail and be out for 1 to 2 years until trial happens. And I think he thought he could beat it, but that's my take.
No, by the way, I agree with the fact that he thought he would be out. His lawyers were shocked that he was sent to the cooler pending trial. They didn't expect that. And I do think when you're Diddy, you think you're above the law. You've got friends in high places. You've got money. You've got possessions, power, prestige, privilege. And so you probably think that he's not going to end up in this ratty detention facility. That's for people like Jeffrey Epstein, who aren't smart enough to get away with it,
Sam Bankman-Fried.
Sam Bankman-Fried, right? Yeah. Ghislaine Maxwell.
By the way, as we're sorting through these legal arguments, we're not only getting a sense of how skilled prosecutors can be, but how important having great defense attorneys can be too, right? And we talk about that a lot. We talk about great lawyers a lot here on Sidebar. And honestly, I can't say that and not mention another impressive group of attorneys over at Morgan & Morgan. This is America's largest injury law firm, our proud sponsor. And look, here's the deal. If you're injured, you got to know what your legal rights are and whether you can be compensated. Morgan & Morgan, they have a dedicated team of over 1,000 attorneys, case specialists, paralegals, investigators. They have an incredible track record of multi-million-dollar verdicts and settlements. In the past few months, I'm talking $12 million in Florida, $26 million in Philadelphia, $6.8 million in New York. Mind you, these are all considerably higher than the highest insurance offers in these cases. There's no upfront fee. They only get paid if you get paid. The whole process can be done straight from your smartphone. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar. Well, let me ask you this. You talk about there could be more charges. What do you hit him with then? Because right now there is a potential defenses. What did I say? He's innocent until proven guilty. I mean, he could try to say there was no criminal enterprise. There was no conspiracy. I didn't transport any of these alleged sex workers. Sex trafficking, the victim one freely came to and from different places. There was no force, fraud, or coercion. But are you suggesting there could be additional charges where his defense has become much more limited?
If the charges involve minors, he's in more trouble because you don't need force, fraud, or coercion when it comes to minors. That's the difference between these charges and the ones against R. Kelly. R. Kelly's charges involve minors. All you need are commercial sex acts, and then you go down for it. Here, his defense is going to be these adults consented, and consent is a defense. But that video is powerful because it shows force. She's been alleging, Cassie, that he kept everyone in line because of force. Apparently, there's a witness that said that he threw a hot skillet of eggs on her, among other ways to forcibly abuse her. So this is going to be really important to have witness testimony from Cassie, from people like Lil Rod, from Don Richards, people who Richard, yes, not plural, Richard, singular. People like that will come forward and they'll be key witnesses because they corroborate each other's testimony.
I was going to ask you about that. If you're prosecuting this case, do you bring out every person that has filed a lawsuit against him? Because what's the defense going to say? They're going to cross-examine every one of these alleged accusers and say, you got something to gain. You're filing a lawsuit. You got something to gain. You file a lawsuit. As the prosecution, do you call every one of those accusers?
I think the more the better. Even the ones who may have some credibility issues, like the guy who shot up the Trump Doral golf course.
Jonathan Oddie?
Jonathan Oddie.
You call him?
A male prostitute. Well, if he corroborates what Cassie is saying, with his issues, you may want to call him, because these aren't perfect people. Like, Diddy is not going to hang out with choir boys all the time. There are going to be some people from some subsets of society that you and I would not hang out with. These are criminals, right? But yet, if they corroborate each other, I think that's powerful testimony.
The counter argument to that would be, if you have a case and you have 5 people accusing someone of sexual assault, and 1 or 2 of them have weaker claims, it could weaken the entire case.
That's why you bring out the bad stuff and direct. You come out and say, you said this. That wasn't true. You're a male prostitute. You took drugs with Diddy. You're the drug mule. You come out and you bring it all out. And you say, tell us the story. And then it depends on the jury to find them credible. If they don't come across well in your pre-interview, then you don't use them. But if they come across well, like, for example, Michael Cohen had his issues. He was the key witness against Donald Trump, and he was just attacked on the stand.
They brought him out last.
That's right, because they had everyone else to corroborate him. And so that's what I mean. You want to sort of build a wall around your key witnesses. You want to build a wall around Cassie. So when they inevitably try to take her down, you say, yeah, but is everyone lying? I mean, that's one thing. Maybe, just maybe, the guy on trial is the one lying, not the 8 other people who are testifying against him.
Assuming she is a government witness. And I think it's fair to say that, because for me, looking at this, I look at the indictment, a lot of it, in my opinion, is based on her allegations. You call her first? Is she your first witness at trial?
It's up to the prosecutors to determine their strategy, whether you want to go big all at once at the beginning, because she is your key witness, or do you want to lead up to her? Generally, you put your best witnesses on first and last, beginning and end, because that's what sticks in the juror's mind.
Primacy and recency.
Yeah, just like you learned in high school debate. I'm sure you were a great debater, Jesse.
Depends upon the argument. Yeah.
But that's what you want to do. And then you put your auxiliary witnesses in the middle. So I would say towards the beginning or towards the end, you'd use her, but that's a strategy up to the prosecutors.
I want to go back to something you mentioned in terms of other charges, right? I think it was very interesting, and I agree with you. Maybe there needs to be what are the charges that stick right now? Get him detained. Can't be tampering with this case anymore. Won't allegedly be abusing anybody anymore. But the idea of a superseding indictment, I think I've spoken to a lot of legal analysts. They say it's likely. More charges are coming. I thought it was really interesting, and it's something you mentioned to me yesterday when we were talking about you coming on. So Talia Graves has filed a lawsuit against Sean Combs. She's the latest accuser, accusing him of sexual assault. She comes out after Combs is arrested, after Combs is detained. What does that tell you about the potential of other people coming forward, and what the prosecutor's strategy might be here?
I think the federal prosecutors, in asking for pretrial detention, wanted people like her to come forward. They wanted those who are scared to come forward to know you can talk now, because that guy you're scared of, he's not getting out pretrial. He is not going to hurt you. He's not going to be able to tamper with you. It's one thing to tell them that. It's one thing for them to see him behind bars on suicide watch in this ratty facility in New York. So I think that was part of their strategy. So that's why they got a huge victory when the court denied Diddy's pretrial release.
We don't know who's been speaking with the government. Do you think it's a situation where Talia Graves was already cooperating with the government and then filed her lawsuit, or filed her lawsuit and now might be speaking with the government?
Could go either way. Chicken and the egg, right?
Yeah.
But she's valuable because it's corroboration. I think when you put women on the stand, I think that that will sell to a jury better than like a Jonathan Dottie, who's a male prostitute with all of his issues. I say, though, that I don't think they should rule out all these other folks who have spoken up, who have proven to be truth tellers, even though the truth teller comes from the mouth of a criminal.
I mean, you make a good point. You can't pick and choose your prosecution witnesses. In terms of when this trial happens, Diddy Combs would have a right for a speedy trial, which I think is 70 days after the indictment, correct me if I'm wrong. Do you think that that's something he would pursue, or would he file a motion, this is a complex case, work through discovery, try to delay this for a while, and how would prosecutors respond?
Well, the speedy trial is like 6 months afterwards. This thing is not going to go to trial in my mind until the end of 2025 or 2026. I do think because there's a lot of work to be done. These defense lawyers, these high-powered lawyers, they don't work cheaply. They build up cases. They have a lot of hours in there, and they know how difficult this case could be. I don't think that moving forward fast inures to the benefit of the defense. And that's because the prosecution has been working on this for years now. They've been looking at this since Cassie came forward, so they've had a lot of head start, and the defense is catching up. So I don't think it helps them to say, okay, let's go as fast as possible. Well, okay, you're letting the guys who are way out in front of you go. I think that hurts you.
So this is a federal case in the federal criminal process. The next, my understanding would be, it's the discovery phase. There's a plea bargaining phase. I talked about this yesterday. I cannot see a scenario where he accepts a plea that doesn't contain significant prison time. They're saying he's at the top of this criminal enterprise. He's the Don, right? I don't imagine they could present him something. Would it be turning against other high-profile people? I don't know, where he doesn't get a minimum of 10 years in prison. Correct me if I'm wrong. Do you see a deal happening?
The deal, I agree with you, would have to include serious prison time. Can you imagine they go through all this? The press conference, the interviews, the shocking video that the world sees. They say, okay, we've settled probation, you go. That would be like a Jeffrey Epstein-style scandal. That will not happen. So anything that results in a settlement will include an orange jumpsuit and steel bracelets for Diddy for years. Will Diddy accept that? I don't think so. I think he thinks he's above it all, that he could beat the rap. That's why I think he's in such a state of shock right now, where according to reports, he's not eating, he's on suicide watch. I don't think he ever expected to be in this situation. And I think he thinks it's just a matter of time where his great lawyers are going to be able to spring him. So I don't think there'll be a deal in this case.
But again, do you think there's any scenario where he'd be like, why would they want to avoid a trial because of the time, the cost, the heartache of a trial? I get it. But at the same time, what would it look like? How much time could he get that a deal, 20 years? Hey, you're not getting life in prison, but you're getting 20 years?
For Diddy, that's like a death sentence because
he's 54, yeah.
54. Not that he won't live longer than 20 years. It's just that he's used to styling and profiling, to borrow a Ric Flair phrase. He has his private jets. He's got his mansion, cigars and his fast living. To live like an inmate, a federal inmate, that's not what he wants. And every day he's there is a piece of his soul just gets stolen away. So I think that he's going to go for broke. He's going to go to trial. And he's going to depend on his great lawyers to get him off.
So if this progresses, if there's no plea that's ultimately worked out, we go to a preliminary hearing. And my question to you about that is, and that's where the government has to show that there's enough evidence to move forward with trial, how much would the prosecution show their hand? Right now, we have no idea who's cooperating with the government. You're dealing with a sensitive sex crimes case. You don't necessarily want to reveal who's been working with you, who these accusers are. It's going to be really tough for them, right? They're going to be in the public spotlight. Look what happened with R. Kelly. So I wonder, how much do they have to reveal at a preliminary hearing? How much do they have to reveal leading up to a trial?
One of the benefits of being a federal prosecutor, as opposed to being a state prosecutor like I am, is that you don't have to provide the defense with the discovery you do in state court. In state court, you got to show them everything. You got to open people up to depositions. Federal court is much better for the government. That's a reason why the government does so well in prosecuting, getting 97% of their cases. So if you ever happen to be prosecuted by anyone, you should hope it's by the state officials and not the federal officials. So I don't have an easy answer as to when this would have to be turned over, but much later and much less disclosure than if this were tried in state court.
Okay, so there's a chance that we might not know what they have, the full breadth of what they have, until basically trial.
Trial, right. It'll be up to the judge, but that's correct, until trial.
Okay, and could they say, with a preliminary hearing, could they not identify who the witnesses are? Would there be some shield put on? You just call them Jane Doe number 1, John Doe number 1, something like that?
Up to the judge. There is extra secrecy and protection for victims of sex crimes. So we'll have to see where this goes. Now, especially when you have an individual who's accused of tampering with witnesses, to threaten witnesses, there would be an order not to reveal the names of the victims and witnesses to the public. You have to keep it quiet. But at some point, you're entitled to confront your accuser and to know the charge against you. So it's just a question of when the defense will be notified the identity of all the players.
The defense, yeah, that's a good point. I'm also thinking I'm thinking from a media point of view and a public point of view, how much we would know versus the defendant. I hear what
you'll know less, right?
Yeah,
yes.
All right, I want to go with this now. So now you're at a trial and you have to prove the case. Racketeering conspiracy. How do you prove that? Because are you saying there was a criminal agreement, there was a criminal enterprise, there was a common purpose, there were underlying crimes, there were overt acts in furtherance of a agreement? It is so complicated, right? I mean, how do you present that to a jury where A, they understand it, and B, they know what they're supposed to do?
Racketeering is a prosecutor's best friend. It's not just for the mafia anymore, because a racketeering case allows you to bring up stuff that occurred beyond the statute of limitations. You're allowed. You open it up. Also, you get much heavier penalties. So you take two separate crimes and you combine them into racketeering if they're two predicate crimes, and now you're facing the rest of your life in prison, really. So it helps prosecutors in different ways. Now, as far as explaining it to a jury, you just say, we got to prove these charges, these predicate crimes. Can we prove, the drug crimes, the gun crimes? Can we prove the sex
beyond
crimes?
A reasonable doubt? You try to prove those?
Still have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury has to be unanimous. But you get the reward of bringing in conduct that you otherwise would not have been able to bring in. It's much more relevant now if it's racketeering, an ongoing criminal enterprise. You get to look back further in time. You get to bring in more acts than you otherwise would have. That's why I say RICO, a.k.a. racketeering, is a prosecutor's best friend.
How do you prove sex trafficking? By force, fraud, or coercion?
That's why that video is important. That video, which is older, which may not relate to a crime charged specifically here in this case, but because of the RICO law, it can be brought in. It's evidence of force. This is how Diddy allegedly kept Cassie and others in line. He used force. That video is going to turn jurors against Diddy. Diddy could deny all he wants. People lie. Video doesn't.
Final question for you. Think it'll be tough getting a jury for the prosecutors in this case?
I don't, because I have had high-profile cases in my jurisdiction. You don't need jurors that are blank slates, empty vessels. They can know about the case. They can even have some opinions about the case, as long as they promise to set them aside and follow the evidence and the law. You could get a jury in any high-profile case. We got it in the case of Donald Trump in New York. The case is.
Yep.
So you can do it anywhere. And prosecutors and defense lawyers are good at vetting jurors, weeding out those who are just Trojan horse candidates, who just are saying what they want to get on the jury to tell their friends and write a book. So they're really good at weeding them out and finding the right jurors.
Dave Aronberg, do you have to go back to Florida? Can you stay here? I want to do a breakdown of every aspect of this case with you. You were great, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jesse.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.